The day they fired me, my boss didn't even try to make it sound difficult. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded like this was just another routine decision, and said, "Honestly, you should be thanking us. This just isn't your level." There it was. Not just the firing. The judgment. The kind that's been building for months, maybe years, just waiting for the right moment to land. HR sat beside him, nodding slightly, already halfway through the script in her head. Severance. Transition. Security escort if needed. They were expecting something. Pushback. Anger. Maybe even desperation. I gave them none of it. I nodded. "Thank you," I said. My boss blinked, just once. Not enough to break composure, but enough to register something didn't go the way he expected. I stood up, slowly. Not rushed. Not defeated. Deliberate. My badge was already deactivated by the time I reached for my laptop. They were efficient like that. Clean exits. No loose ends. Or at least, that's what they believed. As I walked out of that glass office, past people who suddenly found their screens very interesting, I felt something strange settle in. Not anger. Not even relief. Clarity. Because the truth is, they didn't just fire me that day. They revealed something. Something they should have been a lot more careful with. They showed me exactly how little they understood about what I had been building. I should explain something. My name is Adrian Cole, and for 4 years, I worked as a senior systems engineer at a company that loved to describe itself as cutting edge. From the outside, it looked like success. Glass offices. Investor updates. Leadership panels about innovation. Inside, it ran on something much simpler. Control. Ideas didn't belong to the people who built them. They belonged to whoever could present them in the right room. I learned that early. The first time, I designed a resource allocation model that cut operational costs by nearly 20%. It took me weeks. Testing, refining, breaking it apart and rebuilding it until it worked. My manager presented it 2 days later as a team optimization initiative. My name never came up. Then it happened again. And again. Each time, the pattern got clearer. If something failed, it traced back down. If something succeeded, it floated up. At first, I tried to push back, politely, professionally. That's when the language started to change. Adrian's great, but he can be difficult. Brilliant, but not a team player. Strong technically, just not leadership material. That last one stuck. Not because it was true, but because I realized something important. They didn't want leadership from me. They wanted output. And eventually, I stopped correcting them. Because while they were busy deciding what level I belonged at, I started building something far outside of it. The moment everything changed didn't feel dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a meeting. Tuesday morning. Conference room 5B. I had been working on a new system architecture for months, quietly, carefully. A framework that could process distributed data in real time without the usual bottlenecks. It wasn't an upgrade. It was a replacement. I walked them through it step by step. The logic, the scalability, the long-term implications. No one interrupted. When I finished, there was a pause. My manager leaned back slightly and said, "Interesting, but maybe too ambitious for where we are right now." A few nods around the table. Conversation moved on. Just like that. I didn't argue. I didn't defend it. I closed my laptop and went back to my desk. 2 weeks later, I walked into another meeting. Same room. Same whiteboard. Same idea. But this time, he was presenting it. Simplified. Renamed. Cleaned up just enough to make it sound like his. "This could redefine how we scale," he said. And suddenly, everyone was interested. Questions. Excitement. Approval. I sat there, watching something I built get reintroduced to me like I'd never seen it before. And that's when it clicked. Not anger. Not even frustration. Just certainty. Because what they were approving wasn't the real version. Not even close. The system they were so excited about? It was just the surface. And the part that actually made it work was never in that room. The mistake they made was simple. They thought the value was in the idea. It wasn't. It was in what held the idea together. The version they stole and rebranded was clean on paper, easy to explain in board meetings, easy to sell to investors. But it was missing the structure underneath. The fault tolerance layer I had designed after 3 failed simulations. The fallback routing logic I built at 2 a.m. when the system kept collapsing under load. The redundancy protocol I never documented fully because it evolved every time I tested it. That wasn't in their slides. Because they never asked. And I never offered. After that meeting, I stopped sharing anything early. Not out of spite. Out of observation. I wanted to see how far they could take it without me. At first, it looked fine from the outside. They announced it internally as a breakthrough initiative. Leadership praised it. Metrics looked promising in controlled environments. But systems don't fail loudly at first. They fail quietly. Latency spikes. Edge case errors. Small inconsistencies no one prioritizes because everything still works. Then came the first production issue. A minor outage. Blamed on unexpected load conditions. Then another. Then a third. Each time, I watched the same pattern repeat, patch, 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 without ever addressing the root architecture. And each time, I said nothing. Because by then, I wasn't just watching a system fail. I was watching them depend on something they didn't actually understand. And I already knew where that leads. They didn't fire me because I failed. They fired me because things were getting uncomfortable. That's how it always works in companies like that. Problems don't get solved, they get reassigned. The official reason was organizational restructuring. HR delivered it like a courtesy. My manager didn't even attend the final meeting. Just a printed letter. A polite tone. A rehearsed thank you for my contributions. And then the sentence that mattered most. "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." I almost smiled at that. Because they genuinely believed I was leaving empty-handed. No protest. No leverage. No consequence. Just another dismissed engineer cycling back into the job market. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was what I had been doing outside of their ecosystem. Not just code. Not just architecture. Ownership. Over the past 18 months, I had been quietly filing extensions, refining modular components, and securing provisional protections through a legal advisor I met at a developer conference. Every major subsystem I built had been documented independently. Not under company IP. Under mine. They assumed everything I touched belonged to them. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was thinking dismissal equals disappearance. Because while they were deactivating my badge, I was already preparing the transfer of something far more important than a job title. Something they had unknowingly depended on. And in exactly 21 days, they were going to realize what it actually meant to remove me from the system. The first few days after termination felt almost quiet. Not peaceful, just suspended. No meetings. No notifications. No one asking for updates on systems I already knew better than anyone else in the building. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. They had already moved on. By day 3, I saw internal posts celebrating smooth transition of engineering responsibilities. By day 5, my name was removed from documentation credits. By day 7, someone else was being introduced as the technical lead for the architecture initiative. They were accelerating the replacement process. Fast. Confidently. Carelessly. What they didn't realize was that systems don't care about confidence. They care about dependencies. And the system they were running, my system, had layers they never mapped. By day 10, I received a message from an old colleague. Hey, quick question. Do you know why the rollback protocol isn't triggering properly? We had a partial outage last night. I didn't respond immediately. Because I already knew what was happening. They were touching components they didn't fully understand. Trying to stabilize something they had only seen in presentation form. By day 14, the issues weren't minor anymore. Latency spikes turned into transaction failures. Failures turned into cascading delays. And internal confidence started shifting into something else. Silence. By day 18, I got another message. This one was shorter. Are you available to talk? I stared at it for a moment. Not because I was surprised, but because I knew what came next. On day 21, they would stop seeing it as a technical issue and start seeing it as a dependency problem. A dependency they had already removed. The call came on day 21. Not from HR. Not from my old manager. From someone I had never spoken to directly, at least not in an official capacity. A VP from one of our biggest competitors. I'll be direct, he said. We know you're no longer with them. That was how he opened it. No small talk. No probing. Just certainty. I stayed quiet. He continued. We've been watching the instability in their system rollout. We also understand you were the primary architect behind the core framework. Still nothing from me. Because this wasn't new information. This was confirmation of something already in motion. They're trying to patch it, he added. But it's degrading faster than they can stabilize it. Now I spoke. Why are you calling me? A pause. Then the real reason came out. We want to acquire exclusive rights to what you built. Independently. Name your terms. That's when it became clear. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about control of a system they didn't understand and suddenly couldn't live without. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I asked one question. If I sell it to you, what happens to them? There was a brief silence on the line. Then the VP answered honestly. They lose their competitive edge within weeks. Maybe days. I already knew that. Because what they had fired wasn't just an employee. It was the only person who understood the architecture at every layer. And now 2 companies knew it. One was trying to fix it. The other was trying to buy it. But only one understood the real value of what was at stake. And I was about to decide which one got to survive the consequences. I didn't rush the decision. Because this wasn't about impulse anymore. It was about leverage. For 21 days, they had assumed silence meant surrender. But silence, in reality, was preparation. I reviewed everything again, every design layer, every dependency map, every fallback system they had never bothered to document properly. What I had built wasn't just a feature. It was the backbone of their entire scaling strategy. And they had removed the only person who understood how it actually held together. So when I finally replied to the competitor, I kept it simple. I'm willing to sell exclusive rights. But not just the patent layer. The full implementation framework. Their response came in under an hour. We're interested. Let's discuss valuation. That's when I named the number. $2.3 billion. There was a pause on the other end of the call that lasted long enough to mean something. Not disbelief. Calculation. Because they understood what that number represented. Not the code. Not the paperwork. The collapse it could trigger in the wrong hands, or the dominance it could create in the right ones. 2 days later, the deal was structured. Legal teams. IP verification. Transfer clauses. All of it moving faster than anything I had ever experienced inside the company that built it. And through it all, I kept thinking about one thing. They didn't fire me because I wasn't valuable. They fired me because they thought value could be replaced. Now, they were about to find out what happens when it can't. The first sign something had gone wrong wasn't public. It was internal. A sudden emergency all-hands meeting. Then another. Then a system-wide rollback attempt that failed before it even completed. I wasn't inside the company anymore, but I still had eyes on the ecosystem, not through anything illegal, just through people who used to sit in the same rooms I did. And what I heard was consistent. Confusion. Then urgency. Then panic disguised as process. They tried to stabilize it the way they always had, patching symptoms, isolating incidents, assigning blame to unexpected load conditions. But the system wasn't behaving like a bug. It was behaving like something missing. Because when you remove the architect, the structure doesn't immediately collapse. It slowly stops making sense. By day 3 after the transfer, the competitor had already begun integrating components I provided. Quietly. Carefully. Correctly. And that's when the shift became irreversible. Because now there were 2 truths running in parallel. One company trying to maintain a system they no longer fully controlled. And another already rebuilding it correctly from the inside. The market didn't react immediately. It rarely does. But investors notice instability before headlines do. And instability spreads faster than explanation. By the end of the week, I received one final message from my former manager. No greeting. No pride. Just a sentence. What did you do? I stared at it for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because they finally did. I didn't reply to the message. There was nothing left to explain. By then, the situation had already moved beyond conversations and into consequences. The competitor had fully integrated the framework. Not a stripped-down version. Not a rushed adaptation. The full architecture, clean, stable, scalable the way it was always meant to be. Their system didn't just recover. It improved. Latency dropped. Failure rates stabilized. Performance benchmarks started outperforming industry averages within days. Meanwhile, my former company was still trying to triage. That's the polite word they used in internal updates. Triage. But what they were actually doing was rediscovering parts of a system they never understood well enough to rebuild. And every time they fixed one issue, another surfaced somewhere else. Because that's what happens when you replace understanding with ownership. Eventually, ownership runs out. Around that time, I got a final call request from HR. I declined. Instead, I watched from a distance as narratives started shifting. At first, they framed it as unexpected technical divergence. Then aggressive market competition. But inside engineering circles, the truth was already circulating. They hadn't lost to a competitor. They had lost continuity. The thing that keeps complex systems alive when things get messy. And continuity is never stored in documentation. It's stored in people. Weeks later, the deal became public. Not the full details, those stayed private. But enough leaked for analysts to connect the dots. A $2.3 billion acquisition of exclusive rights to a foundational system architecture that now powered one of their largest competitors. My name didn't appear in press releases. It rarely does in stories like this. But internally, everyone knew. And that's when I understood something I hadn't before. This was never about revenge. Revenge implies emotion. This was about miscalculation. They thought they were removing a role. What they actually removed was understanding. And once understanding leaves a system, everything after that is just timing. I thought the story would end with the sale. It didn't. Because systems don't just fail technically, they fail socially first. About a month after the deal became public knowledge in industry circles, I started getting messages from former colleagues. Not apologies. Not congratulations. Questions. Was it intentional? Did you plan it after you left? Did you know it would collapse like that? I didn't answer most of them. Because the truth wasn't dramatic in the way people wanted it to be. There was no master plan to destroy anything. No hidden revenge architecture built into the system. Just a simple reality they had ignored for years. Complex systems depend on continuity of understanding, not just access. And once that continuity is broken, recovery becomes guesswork. Meanwhile, inside my former company, things were quieter than expected. Not because everything was fixed, but because they had entered a phase every failing system eventually reaches. Controlled silence. No one wants to be the person who says the system is still unstable. So instead, they say nothing at all. But silence has a cost. Teams shrink. Confidence erodes. Good engineers leave first because they recognize patterns before leadership does. One of them called me. A former teammate. He didn't ask for help. He just said, "It's not the same anymore. Nothing connects the way it used to." I understood exactly what he meant. Because it was never about me being irreplaceable. It was about the fact that what I built was never fully transferred in the first place. And once that became obvious, the system stopped pretending it was whole. That's when I realized something important. The real impact wasn't the sale. It was the absence. And absence scales in ways people don't anticipate. A few months later, the noise faded. Not because everything was resolved, but because people move on when explanations stop feeling urgent. My former company stabilized in the way unstable systems eventually do, not by returning to what they were, but by becoming something smaller, more cautious, more constrained. Growth slowed. Projects narrowed. Leadership stopped using words like revolutionary and started using words like sustainable. That shift told me everything. Meanwhile, the competitor who acquired the framework didn't turn it into a headline victory either. They simply integrated it. Quietly. Effectively. Like it had always belonged there. That's the part people don't expect when they imagine a story like this. There's no final explosion. No dramatic collapse. Just redistribution. Of capability. Of momentum. Of belief in what works. I didn't go back into that world in the same way again. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. Because I learned something through all of it that no meeting, no promotion, no firing letter ever teaches you. Most companies don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they misunderstand where knowledge actually lives. It doesn't live in documentation. It doesn't live in titles. It lives in continuity between decisions, systems, and the people who carry them forward quietly every day. When that continuity breaks, the system doesn't immediately fall apart. It just slowly forgets how it works. And by the time anyone notices, someone else is already rebuilding it somewhere else. Not as revenge. Not as a statement. Just as progress.